The Appalachian Mountains didn't forgive mistakes. They swallowed them whole, buried them under frost and pine needles, left nothing but silence and old bones. Daniel Thatcher understood this. He'd lived in these mountains for 43 years, hunted them for 35, and in all that time, he'd learned the most important lesson the wilderness could teach. The forest doesn't care about your intentions. It only cares about your competence. His daughter was 10 years old, small for her age, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that never seemed to blink when she looked down a rifle barrel. She lay prone on the ridge, her breathing controlled, her body absolutely still except for the rhythmic rise and fall of her shoulders. "What do you see, Callan?" The girl didn't answer immediately. She was learning to listen before she spoke, to observe before she acted. Good. That would keep her alive. 8-point buck, she finally whispered. 300 yards, feeding pattern, moving left to right across the clearing. Daniel settled beside her, his own rifle forgotten. He wasn't here to hunt. He was here to teach. Wind? 3 miles per hour, east to west. Humidity's high from last night's rain. Bullets going to drop more than normal. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Pride, maybe, or fear. His daughter had a gift, and gifts in these mountains came with prices he wasn't sure he wanted her to pay. "You ready?" Callan's finger moved to the trigger guard. Not on the trigger, never on the trigger until you were ready to kill. He'd taught her that when she was 7. "Yes, sir." "Then take the shot when you're ready, not when I tell you, when you know it's right." The forest held its breath. The buck lifted its head, testing the air, some ancient prey instinct whispering warnings it couldn't quite understand. Callan's breathing slowed, deeper, slower, until Daniel couldn't see her shoulders move at all. The rifle cracked once, sharp, clean, final. 300 yards away, the buck dropped instantly. No suffering, no second shot, just clean, professional death. Daniel watched his daughter's face. No smile, no celebration. She just nodded once, as if confirming something to herself, then engaged the safety and cleared the chamber. "Good shot," he said quietly. "Thank you, sir. You know what this means, don't you? Now that you can do this?" Callan looked up at him, those dark eyes holding something too old for a 10-year-old girl. "It means I can't pretend I don't know how." Daniel Thatcher put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. The mountains were watching. They were always watching. "That's right, baby girl. A gun doesn't make you dangerous. Silence does. Remember that. The loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. The quiet ones, the ones who watch and listen and wait, those are the ones you have to fear." Callan nodded. She understood. She always understood too quickly, too completely. "Can ghosts be loud, Dad?" "No, sweetheart, ghosts don't make noise. That's why you never see them coming." Daniel looked out across the mountains, at the wilderness that had shaped his family for 3 generations, at the forest that would one day test his daughter in ways he couldn't predict or protect her from. "There's something else you need to understand," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "Being dangerous and being a danger are 2 different things. A rattlesnake is dangerous. It'll strike if threatened, but it warns you first, gives you a chance to walk away. That's what warriors do. They're dangerous, but they're not a danger to people who leave them alone." "What about bad people?" Callan asked. "People who hurt others?" "Then you become what you need to be, but only then. And when it's over, you walk away. You come home. You don't let that darkness live inside you forever." Callan was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made Daniel's blood run cold. "What if the darkness is already inside me? What if I'm good at this because I'm supposed to be?" Daniel pulled his daughter close. "Then you choose every single day not to be that thing. You choose to be more than your skills. You choose mercy over vengeance. You choose to walk away when the job's done. That's what separates us from the animals we hunt." He had no way of knowing, sitting on that ridge with his 10-year-old daughter, that 5 years later he would be dead. Murdered by men who worked for cartels that moved drugs through his mountains. Men who would make it look like an accident. Men who would leave his daughter with nothing but questions and guilt, and a rifle she'd sworn never to touch again. He had no way of knowing that 15 years after this moment, his daughter would remember every word he'd said, would test every lesson he'd taught, would become exactly what the mountains had forged her to be, a ghost. 15 years after that day on the ridge, 10 years after her father's murder, Callan Thatcher was face down in Colombian mud, and the jungle smelled nothing like the Appalachian autumn. It smelled of rot and sulfur and impending violence. It smelled like death waiting to introduce itself. Petty Officer Second Class Callan Thatcher was 25 years old now. The rifle skills her father had taught her were buried under a decade of trying to forget. The hunter he'd trained was hidden behind computer screens and encryption algorithms. She'd chosen cryptology specifically because it kept her away from triggers and scopes and the weight of what she was capable of becoming. But the jungle didn't care about her choices. Above her, the canopy was being systematically shredded by heavy machine gun fire. The sound was catastrophic, a continuous tearing roar that vibrated through her sternum and rattled her teeth. "Keep your goddamn head down, Thatcher. You want your face blown off?" Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Kane didn't sound concerned for her safety. He sounded irritated, like she was a dog that had wandered into traffic, not a fellow service member trapped in an ambush. Callan kept her head down, not because Kane told her to, but because staying alive required it. Kane was reloading his MK-18 with the fluid efficiency of a man who'd done it 1,000 times under fire. He was a wall of muscle and aggression. 6'3", 240 pounds of tactical violence. He'd been a SEAL for 20 years. He'd operated in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, and half a dozen countries whose names never appeared in official reports. He was elite. He was experienced. He was everything the Navy wanted in a special warfare operator. And he looked at Callan Thatcher like she was a liability. To be fair, most of Bravo team looked at her that way. To them, she was cargo, a tourist, a cryptologic technician who'd been attached to the unit solely to decrypt cartel communications and locate the hostage. She wasn't a door kicker. She wasn't a shooter. In their eyes, she was dead weight that breathed their air and slowed their pace. A mortar round impacted 20 yards to their left. The ground heaved. Trees exploded into splinters. Callan flinched, curling instinctively into a tighter ball, clutching her encrypted tablet against her chest like it could stop shrapnel. "Look at her!" Sergeant Garrett Merrick's voice cut through the chaos. He was the heavy gunner, currently hammering out controlled bursts from his M240B into the green abyss. "She's shaking apart. We're gonna die here because we had to babysit the princess." They were pinned against a rushing river, the extraction boat burning in the water behind them, black smoke rising into the canopy like a funeral pyre. The cartel mercenaries, highly trained, well-equipped, and numbering at least 50, were closing the net from 3 sides. The SEALs were low on ammunition. Their designated sniper, a quiet professional named Weston Briggs, was already down, bleeding out from a shrapnel wound that had opened his neck like a second mouth. It was hopeless. The enemy was invisible, hidden in the dense foliage, tearing them apart piece by piece with overlapping fields of fire and disciplined tactical movement. These weren't street thugs with AK-47s. These were professionals, former military, contractors who'd learned their trade in American wars and sold it to the highest bidder. Callan's hands trembled as she tried to wipe mud from her eyes. She looked small. She looked terrified. She looked like exactly what Chief Kane said she was. A mistake. But looks, Callan had learned in the mountains of Appalachia, were the most dangerous lie in warfare. In her pocket, hidden from view, was a small photograph. Creased, water-stained. A blonde, 6-year-old girl with a gap-toothed smile and crayon drawings. Weston Briggs' daughter. He'd shown it to Callan 3 days ago during a quiet moment on patrol. "Emma," he'd said simply, "she's why I'm careful, why I always come home." That little girl would never see her father again, and Callan knew, with absolute certainty, that it was partially her fault. She'd known this ambush was coming, had tried to warn them, had been dismissed because she was just the quiet girl with the computer. Not anymore. The contempt hadn't started with the ambush. It had started 3 days ago, during the insertion briefing at the Forward Operating Base in Northern Colombia. The mission was straightforward, at least on paper. A CIA analyst named Robert Hutchins had been kidnapped by the Sinaloa cartel while investigating money laundering operations near the Mexican border. The cartel was holding him in a fortified compound deep in the jungle, using him as leverage in ongoing negotiations with the American government. The SEALs would insert by helicopter, hike 12 miles through hostile territory, breach the compound, secure the hostage, and extract via boat down the river to a secondary landing zone. 48 hours, in and out, minimal footprint. Commander William Price had been explicit during the briefing. Petty Officer Thatcher is non-combatant. Her job is to decrypt the cartel's communication network and provide real-time intelligence on security rotations and hostage location. She hacks the terminal. You get her in, you get her out. If she picks up a weapon, gentlemen, something has gone catastrophically wrong. Kane had laughed, actually laughed. "Don't worry, sir. If Thatcher picks up a gun, she'll probably shoot her own foot off." The room had erupted in laughter. Even Commander Price had smiled, though he tried to hide it. Callan had sat in the back of the briefing room, her face expressionless, her tablet open on her lap, her fingers moving across the encrypted files like she hadn't heard a word. She'd learned a long time ago that responding to contempt only validated it. Silence was stronger. They thought she was quiet because she was intimidated. They didn't realize she was quiet because she was listening. And what Callan heard in the intercepted cartel communications she'd been analyzing for the past 72 hours was that the enemy knew they were coming. The whole operation smelled wrong. The intelligence was too clean. The compound location too conveniently discovered. The security rotations too predictable. But when she'd mentioned this to Kane during the pre-mission equipment check, he dismissed her concerns with barely concealed irritation. "Thatcher, your job is to crack codes, not second-guess operational planning. Leave the tactics to the professionals." So she had. She'd packed her gear, loaded into the helicopter, and kept her mouth shut while the team made jokes about whether she'd remembered to pack her makeup bag. The insertion hike had been 3 days of calculated humiliation. On the first day, 12 miles into hostile territory, Callan had deliberately stumbled over an exposed route. She wanted to see how the team would react, whether they'd help, whether they'd show even the smallest amount of unit cohesion towards someone they considered an outsider. Kane had stopped the column. He'd looked at his watch. He'd sighed like a man being asked to explain basic arithmetic to a child. "That's another 30 seconds lost, gentlemen," he'd announced to the team, his voice dripping with theatrical courtesy. "Everyone wait while the cargo recalibrates." They'd called her paperweight after that. It stuck immediately, spreading through the team like a call sign earned through incompetence rather than skill. During rest stops, they made jokes about her hands, about how soft they looked, how manicured her nails were, even though her hands were raw from rope work, and her nails were chewed down to nothing from stress. On the second day, when they'd set up camp in a small clearing, Callan had tried to join the team near the fire. Sergeant Merrick had been telling a story about Fallujah, his hands gesturing expansively, the team hanging on every word. When Callan sat down at the edge of the circle, the conversation had stopped. Not dramatically, just stopped, like her presence had sucked the oxygen from the moment. After an uncomfortable silence, the team had resumed talking, but they'd shifted their bodies slightly, creating a wall that excluded her without anyone having to say a word. Callan had eaten her MRE alone, 20 feet from the fire, listening to them laugh. But Weston Briggs had been different. On the second night, after the team had settled into their sleeping positions, West had approached Callan's isolated spot at the edge of camp. He'd sat down without asking permission, pulled out a thermos of coffee, and poured her a cup. "You hunt?" he'd asked quietly. Callan had been surprised. It was the first real question anyone on the team had asked her. "Used to. My father taught me." "What'd you hunt?" "Things that didn't want to be found." West had nodded slowly, studying her in the dim light. "I can tell. You move different than the others, quieter, like you're trying not to disturb the forest." "Old habits. Good habits." He'd taken a sip of his coffee. "I grew up in West Texas. Deer, hogs, coyotes. My daddy taught me that hunting isn't about the kill. It's about understanding the animal better than it understands itself." My father said the same thing. West had pulled out his wallet, showed her the photograph of his daughter. "Emma, 6 years old next month. She's why I'm careful out here. Why I always make the smart shot, not the hero shot." Callan had looked at the smiling little girl in the photo. "She's beautiful." "She is, and when I get home, I'm teaching her to shoot. Not because I want her to be a soldier, because I want her to have skills that keep her safe. Skills that make her competent in a world that doesn't forgive incompetence." He'd stood to leave, then paused. "They're wrong about you, Thatcher. I can see it. You're not cargo. You're something else. Something they'll figure out when it's almost too late." Then he'd walk back to his position, leaving Callan alone with his words, and the weight of being seen for the first time in 3 days. On the third day, during the final approach to the compound, Kane had pulled the team into a security halt to review the assault plan. He'd spread the map on the ground, marking entry points and rally positions with efficient precision. "Thatcher," he'd said without looking at her, "you stay with me during the breach. You don't move unless I move. You don't shoot unless the entire platoon is dead and you're the last person standing. And even then, you'd probably be better off surrendering. Understood?" "Understood, Chief." "Good. Try not to trip over anything important, like your own feet." The team had snickered. Callan had said nothing, but she'd noticed something Kane hadn't. A pattern in the terrain. Boot prints, recent, overlapping their planned route. Signs of enemy reconnaissance. The cartel wasn't just waiting for them at the compound. They were tracking them during the approach. She'd opened her mouth to mention it, then closed it again. They wouldn't listen anyway. The compound breach had been textbook. Too textbook. The outer perimeter guards had been exactly where the intelligence predicted. The door charges had blown clean. The room clearing had been efficient and professional. They'd found Robert Hutchins in a ground floor cell, dehydrated and terrified, but alive. The whole operation had taken 11 minutes. Kane had looked genuinely pleased with himself. "Smooth as glass, gentlemen. Let's get our package to the river and go home." Callan had been monitoring the cartel communications on her encrypted tablet, and what she was hearing made her blood cold. The enemy channels were too quiet. No panic, no emergency broadcasts, no commanders screaming about American raiders. Just silence. She'd pulled Kane aside as the team prepared to move out. "Chief, something's wrong. The cartel isn't reacting. It's like they're not even surprised we're here." Kane had barely looked at her. "Because we're that good, Thatcher. This is what professional operators look like. Maybe take notes." They'd started the extract, moving quickly through the jungle toward the river landing zone. The boat was waiting, engine idling, the pilot giving them a thumbs up as they approached through the thick vegetation. Callan had been monitoring the communications right up until the moment the world exploded. The RPG had come from the ridgeline, a white contrail of smoke and death that streaked across the clearing and slammed directly into the extraction boat. The explosion was massive, a rolling fireball that sent debris spinning through the air and turned the river into a burning oil slick. The mortars had started immediately after, professionally coordinated, bracketing fire that boxed the team in against the riverbank with nowhere to run. Then the machine guns opened up. heavy caliber, contained at elevated angles with overlapping fields of fire. PKM machine guns from the sound of them, probably mounted on tripods with pre-sighted lanes of fire. This wasn't an ambush, this was an execution. Kane had reacted instantly, screaming orders, directing the team into whatever cover they could find. Fallen logs, termite mounds, shallow depressions in the mud, anything that might stop a bullet. But there wasn't enough cover. There was never enough cover when the enemy had the high ground and numerical superiority. "Thatcher, get down! Get the fuck down!" Callan had already been down, pressed into the mud, her tablet forgotten, her mind racing through the intercepted communications she'd analyzed over the past 3 days. She'd known this was coming. She'd tried to warn them, and they'd ignored her because she was just the quiet girl with the computer. The mortar fire was walking toward their position, each impact crater getting closer, the enemy adjusting based on spotters who probably had thermal optics and clear lines of sight. Sergeant Merrick was returning fire with his M240B, hammering out controlled bursts toward the tree line. But he was shooting blind. The enemy was invisible in the thick jungle, firing from prepared positions, protected by concealment and cover. "I can't see them," Merrick screamed. "I can't get a target." "Keep shooting," Kane roared back. "Suppression. Make them keep their heads down." But suppression only worked if the enemy was afraid of getting hit. These mercenaries weren't afraid. They were patient. They were professionals. They were winning. And then the enemy sniper entered the fight. Weston Briggs had been the team's answer to enemy snipers. At 35 years old, he was a quiet professional from West Texas who'd spent 12 years perfecting his craft. He didn't talk much, didn't need to. His reputation spoke for itself. 217 confirmed kills across 4 deployments, a legend in the SEAL sniper community. He'd been setting up a counter-sniper position when the first round hit him. The bullet came from somewhere on the ridgeline, 400 yards out, fired from an elevated position with a clear angle down into the riverbank. It was a perfect shot, threading through the jungle canopy, bypassing 3 separate layers of vegetation, and striking Weston in the neck, just above his body armor. The impact spun him sideways. Blood sprayed across the leaves. He collapsed into the mud, his hands clutching at the wound, his eyes wide with shock. The team medic, a young corpsman named Torres, scrambled toward him through the gunfire. "West is hit! Neck wound! I need—" Another shot. This one caught Torres in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him into the mud next to Weston. "Medic down!" someone screamed. Callan watched from her position behind a fallen log. She could see Weston clearly, could see the blood pumping from his neck with every heartbeat, could see his lips moving, trying to form words, his hand reaching out towards something. His rifle, the MK11 sniper system. It had fallen into the mud beside him when he dropped, the scope still intact, the weapon still functional. Weston's eyes found Callan. He couldn't speak. The wound had destroyed something critical in his throat. But his hand kept reaching toward the rifle, toward her. His lips moved. She couldn't hear him over the gunfire, but she could read the words. "Show them." Then his hand fell. His eyes went still. And Weston Briggs, the quiet professional who treated her like a human being instead of cargo, died in the Colombian mud 2 weeks before his daughter's 6th birthday. Callan thought about that photograph, about Emma's gap-toothed smile, about a little girl who would grow up without her father because Callan had been too quiet, too afraid to push harder when Kane dismissed her warnings. Something broke inside her, or maybe something woke up. "West is gone," Torres screamed, clutching his wounded shoulder. "I can't get a pulse." Damn it! Kane was firing his last magazine, each shot deliberate, professional, meaningless. "We need suppression on that ridge. There's a sniper up there pinning us down." "I can't see him, Chief," Merrick yelled back, still hammering away with the M240. "He's ghosting us." A high-caliber round snapped through the air, so close to Kane's head that it cracked the rock beside him and sprayed his face with stone fragments. The chief flinched, diving sideways, his legendary composure finally cracking. The enemy sniper was toying with them. He had the high ground. He had the angle. He had all the time in the world. He was picking them apart, and they couldn't even see him well enough to return effective fire. Callan looked at Weston's body, at the rifle lying in the mud, at 8 men who were going to die because she'd been too afraid to become what her father had trained her to be. Something shifted behind Callan's eyes. The terrified analyst vanished. Something older took its place. Something cold and patient and absolutely still. She began to crawl. The movement wasn't frantic. It wasn't the desperate scramble of someone trying to escape death. It was fluid, methodical, the kind of movement a mountain predator makes when it's already decided how the hunt will end. Callan moved through the mud like water, her body low, her breathing controlled, every motion calculated to minimize her profile and avoid drawing attention. This was the ghost walk her father had taught her in the Appalachian Hills, the movement of something that didn't want to be seen. She reached Weston's body. She didn't look at his face, didn't let herself think about Emma or coffee or the kindness he'd shown when no one else had. She looked at the rifle. Kane saw her. His eyes went wide. "Thatcher, get away from that. You don't know what you're—" Callan pulled the heavy rifle into her shoulder. It felt familiar, like coming home, like her father's Winchester on cold Appalachian mornings, like every hour she'd spent on the state championship shooting range, perfecting her craft while her classmates were at parties and football games. She racked the bolt. She didn't check the safety. She knew where it was by instinct. Kane was moving toward her, trying to physically pull the weapon away. "Thatcher, God damn it, stand down. You're going to get yourself—" "Shut up." The words came out flat, emotionless. The voice of someone who'd stopped caring about rank or protocol, or the opinions of men who'd spent 3 days treating her like cargo. Kane froze. In 20 years as a SEAL, nobody had ever told him to shut up, especially not a petty officer second class, especially not a woman who was supposed to be support personnel. Callan didn't wait for his response. She rolled onto her back, sliding into a gap between 2 massive tree roots. It was an awkward position, impossible for a traditionally trained military shooter who'd learned in flat ranges and standardized positions. But Callan hadn't learned to shoot on flat ranges. She'd learned in the twisted branches of Appalachian oak trees, shooting at angles that made instructors' textbooks useless. She closed her eyes. The jungle disappeared. The gunfire faded. Her father's voice came back, calm and certain, the way it always did when she needed it most. "The forest doesn't care about your intentions, baby girl. It only cares about your competence. So get still, get quiet, and listen." Callan listened. The wind was there, subtle, barely 3 miles per hour, moving left to right across her position. The humidity was crushing, maybe 90%, which meant the bullet would cut through the heavy air with more resistance than normal. The range was approximately 400 yards, based on the angle of incoming fire and the sound delay between shot and impact. She opened her eyes and looked through the scope. The world narrowed, compressed, became a single circle of glass containing the only truth that mattered, the target. She didn't scan frantically the way amateurs did, sweeping the scope back and forth in desperate search patterns. She let her eyes drift, let them settle, let the unnatural patterns reveal themselves against the chaos of jungle vegetation. And there it was, a straight line where no straight lines should exist. The barrel of a rifle, dark metal against green foliage, positioned in a hide that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't spent their childhood learning to see what the forest tried to hide. 400 yards, elevated position, partial concealment behind a fallen log. The enemy sniper was professional, well-positioned, confident. He just wasn't quiet enough. Callan's breathing slowed, deeper, controlled. She exhaled, pushing all the air from her lungs until her body went completely still. Her heartbeat was there, steady and rhythmic, the only movement left in her entire system. Thump, thump, thump. Silence. She squeezed the trigger between the beats. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The sound was distinct, different from the chaotic staccato of automatic weapons fire. A single crack that cut through the noise like a blade. 400 yards away, on the ridgeline, the enemy sniper's scope shattered. The man behind it dropped instantly, his cover suddenly meaningless, his professional positioning irrelevant in the face of a bullet that had found him through 400 yards of jungle and vegetation and wind. The suppression fire from the ridge stopped. The entire battlefield seemed to pause, confused, the rhythm of violence interrupted by something unexpected. Kane stared at the ridge, then back at the small woman lying in the mud, smoke drifting from the barrel of the MK-11. "Target down," Callan said, her voice flat and professional. "Range 400. Windage compensated, 2 clicks left." Sergeant Merrick had stopped firing. His mouth was open. "Did she just—" The words died in his throat. Somewhere in the jungle, someone started screaming orders in English. The voice was American, cold and professional, and absolutely furious. "Incoming!" Torres screamed. "They're charging!" The enemy commander had realized his sniper was dead, had realized the Americans weren't as helpless as they'd appeared, had made a tactical decision that would haunt him for the rest of his very short life. He ordered a full assault. The jungle erupted as 30 mercenaries broke cover, rushing down the slope in a coordinated charge, screaming war cries, firing from the hip, closing the distance before the SEALs could reorganize their defense. They'd sensed the Americans were nearly out of ammunition. They were coming to finish it with knives and machetes and the brutal certainty of numerical superiority. "Fix bayonets!" Kane roared, pulling his combat knife from his vest. "Knives out! We're going hand to hand!" He looked at his men. They were battered, bleeding, exhausted, half of them wounded, all of them nearly out of ammunition. This was the end. They would take as many as they could, but they were going to die on this riverbank. Kane's eyes found Callan. She was standing now, not hiding behind the log anymore. She was stripping off her heavy body armor, moving with calm precision, like she was preparing for something that required freedom of movement rather than protection. "Chief," she said quietly. Kane looked at her. "Give me your radio." "What?" "Give me your radio and your sidearm." Kane stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Thatcher, what are you—" "You hold the line here. I'm going hunting." Before Kane could respond, before he could order her to stand down, before he could physically restrain her, Callan grabbed a suppressor from Weston's kit, twisted it onto the MK-11 with practiced efficiency, and ran. She didn't run away from the fight. She ran perpendicular to it, into the jungle, flanking the entire enemy assault force, moving so fast and so quietly that she seemed to dissolve into the green shadows like smoke. "Where the hell is she going?" Merrick screamed, firing his last magazine at the approaching wave of mercenaries. Kane watched her disappear. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. The quiet analyst, the liability, the paperweight they dragged through 3 days of jungle was running toward the enemy. "She's running," he growled, stabbing a mercenary who vaulted the log in front of him. "The coward is running." But Callan wasn't running. She was flanking. And somewhere in the jungle, something that had been sleeping for 10 years woke up, looked through a rifle scope, and remembered what her father had taught her about being a ghost. The jungle had rules, ancient rules that predated human language and military doctrine, rules written in blood and survival, in the patient mathematics of predator and prey. The first rule was simple: movement attracts attention. The second rule was simpler: the one who moves last usually lives longest. Callan Thatcher had learned these rules before she could read. Her father had taught them to her in the cold Appalachian forests, where deer could hear a heartbeat from 50 yards away, and bears could smell fear through 3 layers of clothing and half a mile of wind. The cartel mercenaries charging down the slope toward Kane's position didn't know these rules. They were professionals, yes. Former military, absolutely. Well-trained and well-equipped and operating with tactical precision. But they were loud. And loud things died first in the forest. Callan moved through the jungle like water, finding a path downhill. Her body low, her breathing controlled. Every step placed with absolute precision on moss, or wet leaves, or anything that wouldn't snap or crack or betray her position. The heavy Mk-11 rifle felt like an extension of her body now, balanced across her chest, the suppressor forward, her finger indexed along the receiver. The enemy force was focused entirely on the riverbank. 30 men charging in a coordinated assault, firing as they moved, screaming to build courage and intimidate their prey. They were convinced of their victory. 8 wounded seals pinned against a river with no ammunition and nowhere to run. They didn't notice the shadow moving through the trees on their right flank. Callan found her position on a moss-covered outcropping of stone that jutted from the jungle floor like a broken tooth. From here, she had a side profile of the entire enemy assault. They were silhouetted against the lighter background of the river clearing, their bodies exposed, their attention fixed forward. It was a shooting gallery. She raised the rifle. The suppressor made the weapon front-heavy, but she'd compensated for that instantly, her muscle memory adjusting to the new balance point without conscious thought. Through the scope, the charging mercenaries became individual targets, human beings with faces and futures. Callan pushed that thought away. Her father's voice came back, calm and certain. When you're hunting, baby girl, you can't think about what the deer might have been doing tomorrow. You can't think about its family or its life, or anything except the shot. The moment you start thinking of it as anything other than a target, you hesitate, and hesitation gets you killed. The suppressor made the shot sound like a heavy branch breaking, a wet crack that blended into the ambient noise of the jungle and the ongoing firefight. The lead mercenary, the one carrying an RPG launcher on his shoulder, dropped mid-stride. He simply ceased being vertical. One moment running, the next moment collapsing like someone had cut his strings. The squad leader, a thick-built man screaming orders in English, crumpled next. The bullet entered his temple and ended his war before he could process what was happening. 3 more went down in rapid succession. Chest shots, clean kills, professional execution. The enemy charge faltered. Men started looking around, panicked, confused. They couldn't hear the shots. The suppressor and the ambient noise of battle masked the sound completely. They could only see their comrades dropping like puppets, blood misting in the humid air, death arriving without warning or direction. "Sniper! Flank right!" someone screamed. The mercenaries turned toward the trees, firing wildly, hundreds of rounds shredding vegetation and accomplishing nothing. They were shooting at ghosts, at shadows, at the space where they thought death should be. But Callan was already gone. She'd fired 6 shots. That meant her position was compromised. That meant staying here for even 3 more seconds was suicide. She dropped from the outcropping, slid down a muddy ravine on her back, controlling her descent with her boots, and popped up 20 yards closer to the enemy line. The mercenaries were still firing into the trees where she'd been, still wasting ammunition on empty jungle. Callan switched to Kane's sidearm, a Sig Sauer P226 with a 17-round magazine. The range was close now, maybe 30 yards. She could see the sweat on the nearest mercenary's face as he fumbled to reload his rifle. She put 2 rounds in his chest, center mass. He dropped. Another mercenary stumbled into her line of sight, backing away from the riverbank firefight, his attention focused forward. He never saw her, never heard her, just felt 2 impacts in his back and collapsed into the ferns. Callan picked up his AK-47, checked the magazine, 23 rounds. Russian military surplus, well maintained. She moved again, deeper into the flank, circling behind the enemy assault. A group of 4 men were trying to set up a mortar position, working with professional efficiency to establish a base plate and sight the weapon. Callan fired a controlled burst. The AK kicked harder than American weapons, less refined but effective. 3 of the 4 went down. The 4th ran. She let him run. Running men spread panic faster than dead ones. Down at the riverbank, the pressure on Kane's position evaporated like morning fog. The enemy force turned on itself, firing into the jungle, screaming about demons and ghosts and white death in the trees. Kane and his men watched in disbelief as their attackers dissolved into chaos. Men running, men dying, men firing at nothing and hitting their own people in the crossfire. "Who is doing that?" Merrick wheezed, clutching his wounded arm, staring into the dark jungle where muzzle flashes appeared and disappeared like fireflies. Kane saw a mercenary drop, saw another one spin and fall, saw a third simply vanish into the undergrowth, pulled down by something invisible. The paperweight. The jungle became a house of horrors for the cartel mercenaries. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't predict. Every tree could hide death. Every shadow could be the last thing they saw. Callan used the terrain like a weapon. She separated them, isolated them, turned their tactical discipline into a liability by forcing them to question every piece of cover and every sightline. She was hurting them. A mercenary took cover behind a fallen tree, trying to establish a defensive position. Callan was already behind him, having circled through a drainage ditch he hadn't noticed. Knife to the kidney, silent, professional. 2 more were moving as a pair, covering each other's movement like they'd been trained. Good tactics, textbook tactics, useless when the threat was already inside their decision loop. Callan shot the rear man first, always the rear man. The front man heard the body fall, turned to look, and caught 2 rounds before he could complete the turn. She was keeping count without meaning to. 14, 16, 19. Her father had taught her that hunting wasn't about killing. It was about understanding the animal better than it understood itself, knowing where it would run before it ran, knowing where it would hide before it hid. These men were well trained, but training created patterns, and patterns were predictable. When threatened, they fell back to rally points. When confused, they clustered together for security. When panicked, they fired at movement and sound. Callan gave them movement and sound. She threw rocks to create noise in one direction while she flanked from another. She fired single shots to draw their attention, then circled behind while they focused on the muzzle flash. She used their own tactics against them, turning their professional training into a script she could read and count. A group of 5 tried to establish a defensive perimeter, backs to each other, weapons out. Smart. Exactly what they'd been trained to do. Callan climbed a tree, took a position 30 feet up in the canopy, shot down at a 45-degree angle. They never looked up. Nobody ever looked up. 3 dropped before the other 2 realized the threat was above them. By the time they figured it out, Callan was already gone, sliding down the opposite side of the tree, moving to her next position. 24. The mercenaries were breaking now. Really breaking. She could hear it in their voices. The commands were becoming screams. The tactical discipline was dissolving into pure survival instinct. Fall back! Fall back to the vehicles! Where is she? The white ghost! The white ghost is here! Callan didn't know where that name came from. Didn't care. Names were irrelevant. The hunt was all that mattered. She intercepted 3 men running toward what they thought was safety. They were sprinting, weapons forgotten, just trying to escape. She let them get close, let them think they might make it. Then she stepped out from behind a tree, and they ran straight into her firing line. 27. At the riverbank, Kane had stopped giving orders. He was just watching. They were all watching. The jungle had become a meat grinder, and somewhere in that green hell, the quiet analyst they'd spent 3 days mocking was systematically destroying an enemy force 3 times her size. Torres, the wounded medic, had managed to get his bleeding under control. He was staring into the jungle with something that looked like religious awe. "Chief," he said quietly. What is she? Kane didn't have an answer. 20 years of experience, hundreds of combat operations, dozens of countries. He'd worked with Rangers, Delta Force, CIA paramilitary, British SAS. He'd never seen anything like this. A technical truck, a battered Toyota Hilux with a DSHK heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, came crashing through the jungle from the south. This was the enemy's reserve, their heavy asset. The gunner was already racking the weapon, the massive 50 caliber barrel swinging toward Kane's position. Take cover, Kane screamed, diving behind the inadequate protection of a rotting log. A 50 caliber machine gun didn't care about cover. It would chew through wood and stone and body armor like tissue paper. If that gunner opened up, the entire team would be shredded in seconds. The gunner squeezed the trigger. Click. Nothing happened. The gunner looked down, confused. His hands moved over the weapon, checking the belt feed, looking for the malfunction. Then he saw it. The receiver of the heavy machine gun had a hole in it. A single, perfectly placed bullet had struck the firing mechanism, shattering the internal components, turning the weapon into an 800-pound paperweight. The gunner looked up, terrified, his eyes scanning the jungle for the shooter who could make that shot. 60 yards away, standing on top of a massive fallen tree, stood Callan Thatcher. She was covered in mud and blood and decomposing leaves. Her uniform was torn. Her face was streaked with camouflage paint she'd made from river clay. She looked like something that had crawled out of the earth itself. The MK-11 was resting casually against her hip, barrel still smoking. She wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't using stealth or shadows or the jungle's concealment. She was standing in the open, visible, absolutely still. The truck driver saw her, saw something in her eyes that made every survival instinct in his body scream warnings his conscious mind couldn't process. He threw the truck into reverse. The tires spun in the mud, found traction, and the vehicle fled back into the jungle. The gunner hanging on desperately, his weapon useless, his courage completely gone. The remaining mercenaries saw their heavy support flee, saw the bodies of their dead scattered through the jungle, saw the white ghost standing on the fallen tree like a monument to their tactical failure. They broke. It wasn't a tactical withdrawal. It wasn't a fighting retreat. It was pure rout. Men dropped their weapons and ran, crashing through the jungle, screaming, abandoning their wounded, abandoning their mission, abandoning everything except the desperate need to be anywhere else. Silence returned to the riverbank, the kind of silence that follows violence. Heavy, oppressive, ringing with phantom echoes of gunfire and screaming. Callan walked back toward the team. Her steps were heavy now. The adrenaline was fading. The gray zone was releasing its grip. She could feel her hands starting to shake, could feel the weight of what she'd just done settling onto her shoulders like wet concrete. She walked up to Chief Kane. The massive SEAL was sitting in the mud, bleeding from 3 different wounds, his rifle forgotten beside him. He looked up at the small woman who stood over him, looked at her muddy boots, her steady hands, her eyes that held something he'd seen in mirrors after bad operations in bad countries. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the jungle, distant, growing closer. Callan reached into her pocket and pulled out Kane's radio. She tossed it into his lap. "Comms are secure," she said softly. "Extraction is 2 minutes out." She turned to walk away, to sit by herself like she always did, to process what had happened in the privacy of her own head. "Thatcher," Kane's voice stopped her. She didn't turn around. The chief struggled to his feet. He winced in pain, but he stood at attention. The rest of the team gathered around. Merrick, Torres, the survivors, battered, broken men who'd been saved by the one person they deemed unworthy. Kane walked around to face her. His hand was shaking as he reached up and ripped the team leader patch from his Velcro sleeve. He held it out to her. "I didn't know," Kane said, his voice thick with something that might have been shame or respect or both. We didn't know. You didn't ask, Callan replied. Her voice held no arrogance, no anger, just simple truth. You're not a tourist, Kane continued. You're not a liability. You're the most lethal operator I've ever seen. You walked us home, Thatcher. You walked us home when we couldn't walk ourselves. He tried to hand her the patch, the symbol of leadership, of respect earned through blood and fire. Callan looked at it, looked at the men who'd bullied her, who were now looking at her with something bordering on worship. She gently pushed Kane's hand away. Keep it, Chief, she said, and a small, tired smile finally touched her lips. I'm just here to fix the radios. She walked past them toward the river, needed to wash the blood off her hands before the helicopter arrived. But the jungle wasn't finished with them yet. Callan knelt by the river, scrubbing the blood and mud from her hands. The water was cool, clean. It carried the blood downstream, toward the ocean, toward oblivion. Kane's radio crackled to life on his vest. A voice came through. American accent, cold, professional. Bravo team, this is Oversight. Be advised you have enemy QRF inbound from the northwest. 2 vehicles. ETA 4 minutes. Recommend immediate extraction. Kane grabbed the radio. Oversight, we have wounded. We need those 4 minutes. Understood. 4 minutes. Not a second more. Oversight out. Callan's eyes narrowed. She pulled out her encrypted tablet, miraculously still functional, despite being dragged through mud and combat. Her fingers moved across the screen, accessing the cartel communication network she'd infiltrated 3 days ago. What she found made her blood run cold. Chief, she said quietly. Kane looked up from helping Torres apply pressure to a wound. We have a bigger problem. Bigger than enemy reinforcements? Callan's fingers kept moving, decrypting, translating, analyzing. That wasn't the cartel's main force. That was the perimeter security. The color drained from Kane's face. You're joking. Their primary contractor is inbound with 40 men, professional operators, former U.S. military, and Chief? She looked up from the tablet, her eyes holding something dark. He's coming personally. This is about me now. Merrick laughed. It was the laugh of a man who'd run out of options and found humor in the absurdity. Of course it is, because why wouldn't the cartel's top enforcer want to personally kill the woman who just slaughtered his entire security team? Callan stood up, water dripping from her hands. I killed 28 of his men in 30 minutes. For someone who's built a reputation as the apex predator, that's a challenge he can't ignore. This is personal. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't Oversight. It was a different voice, deeper, American, speaking with the casual confidence of someone who knew he held all the cards. The little ghost who walks, I know what you are. Callan picked up the radio slowly. Then you know what's coming. The voice laughed. It was a sound without humor. I know you're scared. I know you're a girl playing soldier. I know your father taught you to shoot deer in the Appalachian Mountains. Pretty good skills for hunting animals. But I hunt operators, sweetheart. I've killed 40 of your kind. 40 American warriors who thought they were better than me. Callan's hands tightened on the radio. You talk a lot for a hunter. I talk because I want you to know what's coming. I want you to have time to think about it, to imagine it. I researched every cryptologic technician attached to SEAL teams in this theater. Callan Thatcher, 25 years old, state shooting champion at 14, joined the Navy to escape the mountains, to escape the memory of your father dying. Callan's world tilted. How do you know about my father? The voice on the radio went quiet for a moment. When it spoke again, it was softer, more intimate, like sharing a secret between old friends. Because it wasn't an accident, Callan. Your father was murdered 10 years ago. Cartel scouts found him in the woods near the Tennessee border. He saw something he shouldn't have, a drug shipment being moved through the mountains. He was going to report it, so they killed him, made it look like his rifle discharged accidentally while he was climbing over a fence. Callan couldn't breathe. The jungle was spinning. Her father's death. The event that had shattered her world and sent her running to the Navy. The accident that wasn't an accident. I didn't pull the trigger, the voice continued, but I gave the order. So in a way, Callan, I'm your father's killer. I'm the reason you've spent 10 years running from the mountains. The reason you chose keyboards instead of triggers. The reason you tried so hard to bury the hunter your father created. Kane was watching her, could see something breaking behind her eyes. My name is Dalton Graves, the voice said. Used to be 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers. Got out in 2011, went private. The cartel hired me in 2013 to secure their Appalachian routes. Your father was my first obstacle. I didn't even know his name until you showed up in my intelligence files. Callan's hand went to the knife on her belt. Her father's knife. The one he'd given her on her 16th birthday. The one she'd been carrying when she found his body a year later. Come find me, Phantasma, Graves purred. Let's see if mountain ghosts can hunt real predators. I'm 2 clicks north, waiting. And Callan, bring that rifle. The one you took from the dead sniper. I want this to be interesting. The radio went silent. Callan stood absolutely still. The team was watching her, waiting for her to break, to cry, to show some human reaction to having her past torn open and used as psychological warfare. Instead, she checked the MK-11, verified the magazine, adjusted the scope. Thatcher, Kane said carefully, don't. It's a trap. He wants you isolated, wants you emotional, wants you making mistakes. I know, Callan said quietly. Then you know we wait for extraction. We get out. We let intelligence track him down later. No, Kane stood. That's an order, petty officer. We extract as a team. Nobody goes after him alone. Callan turned to look at him. Her eyes were completely calm. The rage that should have been there was absent. In its place was something colder. Something that made Kane take an involuntary step backward. You can't keep up, Chief. Your team needs medevac. They need treatment. They need extraction. She paused. And I need to finish this. Thatcher, you're not thinking straight. He just told you he killed your father. He's playing you, getting inside your head. He already was inside my head, Chief, for 10 years. Every time I looked at a rifle and felt guilty for being good at something. Every time I chose the safe path instead of the hard one. Every time I let fear make my decisions. She checked her magazine again. He took my father. He took 10 years of my life. And he thinks I'm going to run from him? Kane stepped in front of her. I'm not letting you go alone. Callan met his eyes. You can't stop me, and you know it. That's an order, goddammit. I stopped taking orders, Callan said quietly, when you left me to carry your mistakes for 3 days. When you treated me like cargo instead of a shipmate. When you made it clear that my life was worth less than your ego. The words hit Kane like a physical blow. Now get on that helicopter, Callan continued. Get your team to safety. Do your job, Chief. She brushed past him, moving toward the jungle. He'll kill you, Kane called after her. Callan stopped at the tree line, didn't turn around. Maybe, or maybe I'll walk home. Either way, Chief, it's my choice now. She vanished into the jungle. Torres looked at Kane. Should we go after her? Kane stared at the spot where she'd disappeared, listened to the approaching helicopter, looked at his wounded team, at men who would die without immediate medical attention. No, he said finally. She made her choice. We make ours. He keyed the radio. Oversight, Bravo team is ready for extract. We have one operator pursuing enemy commander, requesting air support to her position. Negative, Bravo. We don't have assets available for solo operator support. She's on her own. Kane looked at Merrick, at Torres, at the survivors who'd watched a quiet analyst transform into something legendary. My money's on the ghost, Merrick said quietly. Mine too, Torres added. Kane didn't respond. He was thinking about the look in Callan's eyes, the absolute calm, the complete absence of doubt. He'd seen that look before. In the eyes of men who'd already made peace with death, who'd stopped caring about odds or backup or anything except completing the mission. "God help that bastard," Kane whispered. "He thinks he's hunting her. He has no idea." The helicopter descended through the canopy, rotors beating the air, extraction finally arriving. And somewhere in the jungle, two hunters moved toward each other. One had built his reputation on 40 American kills. The other had been quiet for 10 years. But quiet things, as Callan's father had taught her, were always the most dangerous. The jungle held its breath, and the hunt continued. The jungle at dusk was a different animal than the jungle at noon. The shadows grew teeth. The silence developed weight. Every rustling leaf became a threat assessment. Every bird call a potential warning system. Callan moved through this transformed world like she belonged to it, like she'd been born from the same soil that fed the trees and decomposed the dead. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the forest. Her heartbeat synced with the pulse of hidden life around her. She was tracking Dalton graves the way her father had taught her to track wounded bears. Not by following blood trails or broken branches, but by understanding the animal's mind. By knowing where it would go before it went there. By becoming the thing she hunted. Graves had said he was 2 kilometers north. That was probably a lie. Professional operators never broadcast their true position, but the lie itself was information. He wanted her to think north, which meant he was probably northeast or northwest. Somewhere close enough to observe her reaction to his broadcast. Somewhere elevated with clear sightlines. Callan checked her tablet one more time. The cartel communications network was still accessible, though the encryption was getting stronger as they realized someone was inside their system. She could hear vehicle movements, radio checks, tactical updates, and underneath all of it, she could hear him, Graves, giving orders with the casual authority of someone who'd commanded men in legitimate wars before selling his skills to the highest bidder. "All units establish perimeter, 200-meter spacing, thermals active. She'll try to hide in the cold spots near water. Don't let her reach the river." Callan smiled without humor. He was good. He understood how thermal optics worked. Understood that water-cooled air created dead zones in thermal imaging. He was planning for a competent opponent. But he'd made one critical mistake. He thought she would run. Callan wasn't running, she was hunting. She killed the tablet's display and buried it under a rotting log. The device was dead weight now. Everything she needed was in her head and in the rifle slung across her chest. The MK-11 had become an extension of her body. She knew its weight distribution, its trigger pull, the way the suppressor changed the barrel harmonics. Weston Briggs had maintained this weapon like it was a holy relic, and Callan could feel his professionalism in every clean mechanism and perfectly zeroed sight. She thought about Emma, about that gap-toothed smile, about a promise she'd made to herself at the riverbank. "I'll walk home, West, for both of us, for Emma. I'll walk home." She moved deeper into the jungle, angling northeast, using terrain features to mask her movement. A ravine here, a stream bed there, always low ground where thermal signatures would blend with ambient temperature and where sight lines from elevated positions would be obstructed. The first enemy position appeared after 15 minutes of careful movement. 2 men with a PKM machine gun set up on a natural choke point between 2 massive mahogany trees. They had thermals, night vision, good fields of fire covering the approaches from 3 directions. They were watching the wrong direction. Callan circled wide, using a dry creek bed to stay below their sightline. She came up behind them, moving with the ghost walk that made no sound on the jungle floor. The suppressed rifle whispered twice. Both men dropped without ever knowing she'd been there. She didn't take their weapons or equipment, didn't want the weight. She was traveling light now, just the rifle, the sidearm, and the knife her father had given her on her 16th birthday. The second position was more professional. 3 men in a triangular formation with overlapping fields of observation. They were maintaining radio discipline, checking in every 5 minutes with terse, professional updates. Former military for certain. Probably former American military based on their tactical formations. Callan waited. Patience was a weapon most people forgot about. They thought hunting was about action and aggression and overwhelming force. But real hunting, the kind that kept you alive in places where mistakes were fatal, was about stillness, about becoming part of the landscape until the prey revealed its weakness. One of the three men pulled out a cigarette. His partner said something that Callan couldn't hear. The man laughed, turned his back to light the cigarette away from the wind. Callan shot him first, then the one who'd made him laugh, then the third man before he could raise his rifle or trigger his radio. 3 shots, 3 seconds, 3 men who would never collect their paychecks. She was deep in Graves's perimeter now, could feel the tactical net closing around where he thought she would be. But she wasn't where he thought. She was already inside, already among his men, already turning his defensive perimeter into a killing field. The radio chatter increased. Professional calm was giving way to nervous energy. Men were finding the bodies, reporting in. Graves's voice came across the net, still controlled, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. She's inside the perimeter. Tighten up. 2-man teams. Nobody moves alone. Callan found a massive strangler fig tree, its roots creating a natural hide position 15 feet off the ground. She climbed into it, settled into a stable shooting position, and became invisible. From here, she had overlapping sight lines on 3 different approaches. She could see enemy positions, could track their movement patterns, could pick her targets. The hunting had evolved into something more surgical, more patient. She was no longer reacting to threats, she was selecting them, eliminating them in an order designed to create maximum confusion and minimum risk. A 2-man patrol moved through her sector. She let them pass. They weren't a threat to her current position, and shooting them would reveal her location. Another patrol, this one moving more carefully, scanning with thermal optics. One of them paused, looking directly at her tree. The thermal wouldn't see her. The roots and thick vegetation created a heat signature that masked her own. But the man was suspicious, intelligent, trusting his instincts over his equipment. Callan waited until he looked away. Then she dropped from the tree behind them, moving in complete silence, and put her knife through the base of the first man's skull. The second man heard something, started to turn. Callan's sidearm coughed twice. He dropped. She was back in the tree before the body stopped twitching. The body count was climbing. She'd stopped keeping precise track after 30, but she estimated she'd eliminated at least 15 of Graves' 40-man force. The rest were scattered across 2 kilometers of jungle, increasingly paranoid, increasingly isolated. And somewhere in this green hell, Dalton Graves was realizing he'd made a catastrophic error. He'd invited a predator into his territory and assumed it would behave like prey. The radio in Callan's pocket crackled. Graves's voice. No longer casual, no longer confident. "Callan Thatcher, I know you can hear me. I'm impressed, truly. 15 of my men dead, and you haven't even broken a sweat. Your father would be proud." Callan didn't respond. Speaking would give away her position to anyone with direction-finding equipment. "But you're making a mistake," Graves continued. "You think this is about revenge, about your father, about proving something to those SEALs who treated you like garbage. It's not. This is about pride. Mine. I built a reputation. 40 American operators dead by my hand. You're trying to become number 41 on someone else's list. You're trying to take my crown." Silence. Just the jungle breathing, the night insects starting their chorus. "Come find me, Callan. Stop hiding behind that rifle and face me like a warrior. Or are you just another scared little girl who got lucky?" Callan pulled out the radio, keyed the mic once, let him hear the click, let him know she was listening. Then she threw the radio as hard as she could into the jungle, 100 yards from her position. Let him triangulate that. She was already moving, shifting to a new position, knowing that Graves would send men to investigate the radio signal, knowing that those men would be vulnerable, exposed, perfect targets. 4 men arrived at the radio's position within 3 minutes. They moved tactically, covering each other, checking corners, professional, cautious. Callan was 200 yards away with an elevated firing position and perfect sightlines. The suppressed rifle whispered 4 times. 4 men dropped into the vegetation like marionettes with cut strings. 19 down, 21 to go. But Callan was getting tired. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the first engagements was fading. Her ribs hurt where she'd slammed into the ground during the initial ambush. Her hands were starting to shake with exhaustion. Her breathing was getting harder to control. She needed water, needed rest, needed to find Graves and end this before her body gave out completely. The river was close. She could hear it, a constant rushing sound that would mask movement and provide cover from thermal optics. But it was also the obvious choice. Graves would expect her to move toward water, so she moved away from it. There was a ridgeline to the east, steep and covered in loose shale, that would be hell to climb, but would provide commanding views of the entire tactical area. Graves would position himself somewhere with good observation, somewhere he could coordinate his men and maintain situational awareness. Callan started climbing. The ascent took 40 minutes. Her hands were bleeding by the time she reached the top, torn by sharp rock and thorny vegetation. Her legs burned with lactic acid. Her lungs screamed for oxygen in the humid air. But she made it, and from the ridge, she could see everything. The jungle spread below her like a dark ocean. She could see thermal strobes from Graves' men as they moved through the vegetation, could see their search patterns, could identify command and control positions by watching how the patrols oriented themselves. And there, on a secondary ridge 600 yards to the north, she saw him, Dalton Graves. He was set up in a perfect hide position with a ghillie suit that made him nearly invisible, even to her trained eye. But he'd made one mistake. He was using a radio with an illuminated display, and that tiny square of light was enough. Just enough. Callan settled into a shooting position. Her body was exhausted, shaking with fatigue, but her breathing steadied. Her father's voice came back. "When you're tired, baby girl, that's when you need discipline most. The body wants to quit. The mind wants to panic. But the trigger finger just needs to be steady for 1 second. Just 1 second of perfect calm in a lifetime of chaos." 600 yards, uphill shot. Wind was negligible at this hour, but the humidity was still crushing. The bullet would drop more than usual. She'd need to aim high, compensate for the angle, account for the target's partial concealment. It was an impossible shot, the kind of shot that separated competent shooters from legendary ones. Callan closed her eyes, felt the jungle around her, the temperature, the air pressure, the subtle movements that indicated wind direction and speed. She opened her eyes and looked through the scope. Graves was talking on the radio. She could see his jaw moving, could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew she was close, could feel it the way all apex predators can feel when they've stopped being the hunter and become the hunted. Callan's breathing slowed. Her heartbeat dropped. The world narrowed to a circle of glass containing a man who'd killed her father and 40 other Americans. Her finger touched the trigger. And then Graves moved. He stood up, completely exposed, rifle slung across his back. He pulled off his ghillie suit and threw it aside. Then he pulled out a chem light, cracked it, and held it above his head. He was making himself a target, daring her to take the shot. Callan kept the crosshairs on his chest. One squeeze, one bullet, one dead man who deserved to die. But something made her hesitate. Graves was smiling. Even at 600 yards, even in the failing light, she could see him smile. He knew she was out here, knew she had him in her sights, and he was smiling because he knew something she didn't. Callan scanned the area around Graves, looked for the trap, the ambush, the thing she was missing. And she found it. Thermal signatures, 8 of them, positioned in a circle around Graves' position, hidden, waiting. They weren't watching for external threats. They were watching the approaches to Graves, watching for someone trying to move in for a kill. If she took the shot, they'd triangulate her position instantly. She'd be dead before she could chamber the next round. Graves knew she was watching. He held up the radio and spoke into it, knowing she still had Kane's spare, knowing she could hear him. "I felt you looking at me, Callan. That's good. That's what hunters do. We feel each other across the distance. We know when we're in each other's sights." He paused. "But you're not going to take that shot. You're too smart. You see my men. You see the trap. So instead of shooting from 600 yards, why don't you come down here and face me? Warrior to warrior, hunter to hunter." Callan lowered the rifle. He was right. The shot was suicide. But more than that, she realized something else. She didn't want him dead from a distance. She wanted to look him in the eyes, wanted him to know who beat him and why, wanted him to see Daniel Thatcher's daughter before she ended this. She started down the ridge. The approach took another 30 minutes. Callan moved like water again, flowing between Graves' security positions, using every depression and shadow and terrain feature to mask her movement. The men guarding Graves were good, but they were watching for frontal approaches, for direct assaults, for conventional tactics. Callan came from above. She'd circled to the east, climbed another ridge, and approached Graves' position from the high ground. It was the long way around, the exhausting way, but it put her above his security perimeter with a clear line of sight to his position. Graves was sitting on a rock now, rifle across his knees, radio beside him, waiting, patient. Callan dropped into a position 40 yards from him, close enough to talk, close enough to shoot, close enough to see his face clearly. "I know you're there," Graves said without looking in her direction. "I can feel you. It's a gift. Some hunters have it, most don't. You can feel when something's watching you, when something wants you dead." Callan stood up, stepped out from behind the tree that had concealed her. The MK-11 was aimed directly at Graves's chest. He turned to look at her, smiled. There she is, the white ghost, the mountain girl who murdered 42 of my men in under 2 hours. I'm honored. 42 of your men, Callan said quietly, and 40 American operators you killed before that. And my father. That makes 83 reasons why you should die right now. Graves stood slowly, carefully. His hands stayed away from his weapon. Your math is off. 83 would mean you value your father the same as all those other lives. But we both know that's not true. He's worth more. He's worth everything. That's why you're here. That's why you walked away from your team and came into the jungle alone. For him. For justice. Graves laughed. It was a sound without warmth. Justice. That's what they all say. Every operator I've killed thought they were fighting for justice, for freedom, for the American way. They were really just fighting because someone told them to, and it paid well. You were one of us, Callan said. You were a ranger. You wore the uniform. You took the oath. I was a slave, Graves corrected, following orders from politicians who never set foot in a combat zone, fighting wars that couldn't be won for objectives that kept changing. I woke up one day and realized I was better than the system I was serving. So I left. Started working for people who understood that loyalty is a transaction, not a suicide pact. And my father? What transaction was his death? Graves' smile faded. Your father was a good man in the wrong place. He saw a cartel shipment moving through the Appalachians. He was going to report it. He had to die. It wasn't personal. It was business. It was murder. It was 2014. I'd just gone private after my discharge. The cartel hired me to secure their Appalachian routes. Your father was the first obstacle I removed. I didn't even know his name until you showed up in my intelligence files 3 days ago. Callan's finger tightened on the trigger. You took everything from me. No, Graves said. I took your father. You took everything else from yourself. You spent 10 years hiding from what you are, pretending that burying your skills would somehow honor his memory. But he didn't teach you to hunt so you could run away from it. He taught you so you'd survive, so you'd be competent in a world that eats the incompetent alive. Don't talk about my father like you knew him. I know he'd be proud of you right now. 42 kills in 2 hours. Professional, efficient, cold. You're exactly what he trained you to be, a perfect hunter. I'm nothing like you, Callan said. You're exactly like me. You're a killer who's good at your job. The only difference is the flag you wear while you do it. No, Callan said. The difference is I kill to protect. You kill for profit. I stop when the mission's complete. You never stop because there's always another payday. I'm a warrior. You're a murderer who learned military skills. Graves' eyes hardened. Big words from a little girl. You want to see if you can back them up? He moved his hand toward his rifle. Not fast, not aggressive, just a slow, deliberate movement that said, I'm going for my weapon now. Stop me if you can. Callan adjusted her aim. Fired. The bullet struck Graves's rifle, right through the receiver, shattering the weapon's internal mechanism and rendering it useless. The impact knocked the rifle from his hands and sent it skittering across the rocks. Graves stared at the destroyed weapon, then at Callan. Then he started laughing. Oh, you're good. You're really good. That shot was what, 40 yards? Moving target, small strike zone, perfect execution. He clapped his hands slowly. Your father taught you well, but you made a mistake. What mistake? You didn't kill me when you had the chance. He moved faster than Callan expected, faster than someone his age should have been able to move. His hand went to his sidearm, drawing with the practiced speed of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Callan fired first. The bullet caught Graves in the right shoulder, spinning him sideways. His pistol went flying. He stumbled but didn't fall, clutched his shoulder, blood running between his fingers. You're fast, he gasped. I'll give you that. Callan kept the rifle aimed at him. It's over, Graves. Your men are scattered. Your weapons destroyed. You're wounded. Surrender and I'll get you medical attention. You'll face trial. Answer for what you've done. Graves laughed again. This time the sound was wet, bubbling through blood and pain. Trial? I'm not going to trial. I'm not spending the rest of my life in some federal prison while lawyers argue over jurisdiction and evidence. He pulled a knife from his belt, a serious blade, K-bar, 7 inches of carbon steel. Come on, mountain girl. Let's finish this the old way. No guns, no technology, just 2 hunters in cold steel. Winner gets to walk away, loser feeds the jungle. Callan should have shot him, should have put another bullet in him and called it justified self-defense. But somewhere in her exhausted, traumatized mind, she wanted what he was offering, wanted to beat him with her hands, wanted him to feel what her father felt, wanted it personal and close and absolutely final. She lowered the rifle, drew her father's knife. It was a mistake. She knew it the moment she made it. But she was too tired to care, too angry to think clearly, too human to be the perfect tactical operator Kane's team had needed. Graves smiled, blood on his teeth. Now we're talking. He came at her fast, much faster than his wounded shoulder should have allowed. The knife slashed in a professional pattern, low, high, feinting, testing her reactions. Callan parried, backpedaled. Her father had taught her knife fighting in the mountains, how to defend against bears, against other hunters, against men who thought size and strength were everything. But Graves had been taught by the Rangers, by men who'd refined blade work into a science. He was bigger, stronger, more experienced, and she was exhausted. The first cut opened her left forearm, shallow, painful, a message that said, I can reach you whenever I want. The second cut she blocked with her own blade, steel screaming against steel. They circled each other, two predators, both wounded, both determined. "Your father died begging," Graves said, breathing hard. "Did you know that?" "My men told me. He begged them to spare him, said he had a daughter, said she needed him." Rage exploded through Callan's chest. White hot, overwhelming. She lunged. It was exactly what Graves wanted. He sidestepped, grabbed her wrist, twisted. The knife flew from her hand. He had her in a lock now, his blade coming toward her throat. Callan dropped her weight, used his grip against him, rolled backward, broke the hold. She came up empty-handed. He still had his knife. She was bleeding, disarmed, losing. Graves advanced. "You're good, but good isn't enough. You needed to be perfect. And nobody's perfect when they're this tired, this emotional, this human." He lunged, fast, professional. The knife aimed for her chest. Callan didn't try to block, didn't try to dodge. She moved inside the strike, accepting the risk, getting close enough that the knife's edge couldn't cut. Only the flat could slap. Her hands shot to Graves' wounded shoulder, grabbed, squeezed. He screamed. The knife dropped from nerveless fingers. Callan drove her knee into his stomach. Once, twice. He doubled over. She grabbed his head and brought her knee up into his face, felt his nose shatter, felt his weight collapse. He went down hard, blood pouring from his face, shoulder useless, gasping for air. Callan picked up his knife, stood over him, every instinct in her body screaming to finish it, to end him, to make sure he never hurt anyone else ever again. Graves looked up at her through blood and broken teeth. "Do it. You know you want to. I killed your father. I earned this. Give me a warrior's death." Callan raised the knife and stopped. Her father's voice, clear as day, like he was standing right beside her. "Killing is easy. Mercy is what separates us from animals. Being dangerous and being a danger are two different things. You choose every single day not to be that thing. You choose to walk away when the job's done." "No," Callan said. Graves stared at her. "What? You don't get a warrior's death. You don't get honor or glory or a quick end. You get a cage. You get trial. You get life in a supermax prison where nobody will remember your name or care about your reputation. You'll die forgotten, alone. That's worse than death for a man like you." She pulled out zip ties from her vest, bound his hands behind his back despite his struggles, bound his feet, left him lying in the dirt like the garbage he was. "You're making a mistake," Graves hissed. "My men will find you. They'll kill you before you get 100 yards. Your men are dead or running. It's over." Graves started to say something else, but Callan was already walking away. She picked up her rifle, checked her ammunition, keyed Kane's spare radio. "Oversight, this is Thatcher. Target is secure. Requesting immediate extraction and medevac. One enemy prisoner. Wounded but stable." Static, then a voice. "Thatcher, confirm your position. We have no tactical support in your area." "I don't need tactical support. I just need a helicopter. I'm walking to primary extraction LZ. ETA 20 minutes. Have someone ready to pick up trash on the way." "Understood. Extraction package inbound, 25 minutes. Callan looked back at Graves one more time. He was still conscious, still glaring at her with pure hatred. "You should have killed me," he said. "Probably," Callan agreed. "But I'm not you. I don't kill when I don't have to. That's the difference between us. That's why I'll walk home and you'll rot in a cell." She started walking. The jungle at night was different on the way out. Calmer, quieter, like it knew the hunt was over and the killing was done. Callan walked for 15 minutes before she heard them. Voices, American voices, shouting her name. She rounded a bend and found them. Kane, Merrick, Torres, the entire team. They'd refused extraction, refused to leave without her. They were moving toward the gunfire, wounded and exhausted, coming to back her up even though she'd explicitly told them not to. Kane saw her first, stopped dead, looked at her covered in blood and mud and exhaustion. "You're alive," he said. It sounded like a prayer. "I'm alive." "Graves?" "Secured, quarter-mile back. Wounded but stable. He needs a medevac." Kane just stared at her. "You took him alive?" "He'll face trial. Answer for what he's done. That's justice." Merrick laughed. It was the laugh of a man who'd been proven completely wrong and was happy about it. "She went into the jungle alone, fought 40 men, and brought back the most wanted cartel operator in South America. Alive. For trial." He looked at Kane. "Chief, I don't even know what to say." Torres was already moving toward Graves' position with a med kit. "I'll stabilize him for transport." Kane approached Callan slowly. He looked at the woman who'd saved his team, who'd captured a man who'd killed 40 American operators, who'd walked through hell and come out the other side. "How?" he asked simply. Callan understood the question, not how she'd survived, how she'd become this. "My father taught me to hunt," she said quietly. "The jungle taught me to fight, but I'm still the same person I was 3 days ago, Chief. You just finally bothered to look." Kane nodded slowly. "We were wrong. About everything." "Yes, you were." No anger in her voice, just truth. "What now?" Kane asked. Callan looked at the jungle around them, at the darkness that had tested her, at the path that led home. "Now?" She shouldered her rifle. "Now I walk home." The helicopter arrived 10 minutes later, big, loud, beautiful. They loaded Graves first. He was conscious enough to glare at Callan as they strapped him to the stretcher. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Callan replied. "You just don't know it yet." The team loaded next. Kane insisted Callan take the seat by the window, the seat reserved for the person who'd earned the most respect. Callan sat, looked out at the jungle disappearing below, at the green hell that had tested her and forged her and given her back something she'd lost 10 years ago. Her father's voice came one more time, soft, proud. "You did good, baby girl. You walked home, just like I taught you." Merrick leaned over. "You okay, Thatcher?" "I'm tired. I'm hurt. I'm probably going to have nightmares for the rest of my life." She paused. "But I'm okay. I'm walking home." Torres, his shoulder bandaged but stable, looked at her with something like awe. "What you did back there, that was... I don't have words for it." "Good," Callan said. "Then don't use any. Just get some rest. We all earned it." The helicopter climbed higher. The jungle became a dark carpet below. Somewhere down there she'd left pieces of herself. The quiet analyst who'd been afraid of her own capabilities. The girl who'd run from her father's legacy. The person who'd thought she could escape what she was by choosing a different path. But she'd also found things. Strength she didn't know she had. Courage that had been waiting 10 years to emerge. Peace with her father's memory and her own deadly skills. Kane was watching her. "I was wrong about you. We all were. You're not cargo. You're not a liability. You're one of the best operators I've ever seen." Callan closed her eyes. "I'm just someone who does what needs doing. That's all. That's everything." The helicopter's steady rhythm was hypnotic. Callan felt herself starting to drift. Exhaustion finally winning the battle against adrenaline. Kane's voice came one more time, soft enough that maybe she imagined it. "Thank you for walking us home." Callan didn't respond. She was already asleep, dreaming of Appalachian mountains, of her father teaching her to ghost walk through autumn leaves, of silence and stillness, and the patient art of becoming invisible. In her dreams, her father smiled and said one last thing. "You're home now, baby girl. You're finally home." Epilogue. Naval Intelligence Office, Dam Neck, Virginia, 3 months later. Callan sat at her desk, surrounded by computer monitors and encrypted files. Back in the world of cryptology, back in the safe, quiet work of breaking codes and intercepting communications. But the rifle case under her desk suggested she hadn't completely returned to her old life. The silver star sat in a frame on her bookshelf. The citation praised her actions in Colombia. 42 enemy combatants neutralized. One high-value target captured. 8 American lives saved. It used words like valor and heroism and dedication to duty. It didn't mention what it felt like. Didn't mention the nightmares. Didn't mention how she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night searching for threats that weren't there. But it also didn't mention how she'd stopped being afraid of the person she was capable of becoming. A knock on the door. Kane entered without waiting for permission. He was in dress uniform, looked uncomfortable in the pressed fabric and polished brass. "Got a mission," he said without preamble. "Deep jungle, high-value target, Tier 1 priority, need the best." Callan looked up from her screen. "You have 30 qualified snipers in this building, Chief. I need the ghost." Long pause. The office air conditioning hummed. Outside she could hear the sounds of the base. Life continuing, the world turning. "I'm done hunting, Chief." Kane nodded like he'd expected that answer. "The offer stands, always, if you change your mind." He pulled a small box from his pocket, set it on her desk. "The team wanted you to have this. They voted. Unanimous." Callan opened the box. Inside was a gold seal trident pin, the symbol of naval special warfare, the mark of someone who'd earned their place among the elite. "I'm not a SEAL," Callan said. "The pin disagrees. So do 8 men who'd be dead without you." Kane paused at the door. "You earned this, Thatcher. Not because someone said you could wear it, because you proved you deserve it. There's a difference." He left. Callan sat alone with the pin, with the symbol of everything she could be if she wanted. All she had to do was say yes, step back into that world, become the operator they needed. But she'd made her choice. She closed the box, set it on the shelf next to her silver star, turned back to her monitors and encrypted files. She was done hunting. For now. Appalachian Mountains, Tennessee, 2 weeks later. Callan hiked the familiar trails of her childhood, the paths her father had shown her, the mountains that had shaped her into what she was. She carried 2 rifle cases, one containing her father's old Winchester, the other containing the MK-11 she'd kept as a personal weapon, purchased from the Navy at cost, maintained with the same obsessive care Weston Briggs had shown. She reached the spot where her father had died, a small clearing, a broken fence where the official report said his rifle had discharged accidentally. Except it hadn't been an accident. She knew that now. And so did Dalton Graves, sitting in a supermax cell in Colorado, awaiting trial for 41 counts of murder. Callan set flowers on the ground, spoke quietly to the trees and the wind. "I found him, Dad, the man who gave the order. He's in a cage now. He'll die there. Forgotten." She paused. "I wanted to kill him, almost did, but I remembered what you said about the difference between being dangerous and being a danger. I chose mercy. I chose to walk away." The wind moved through the leaves. It sounded like her father's voice, like approval. "I kept both rifles. The hunter I was, the warrior I became. I'm not sure which one I am anymore. Maybe I'm both. Maybe that's okay." She opened both cases, looked at the 2 weapons that represented 2 different parts of her life. "I'm keeping them both," she said finally. "The mountains taught me to hunt. The jungle taught me to fight. But you taught me the most important thing. You taught me when to walk away, when to come home." She closed the cases, shouldered them both, started down the mountain trail. The Appalachian wilderness watched, silent, patient, keeping its secrets. A mountain girl who'd walked into the jungle and walked out a legend. Who knew the difference between being dangerous and being a danger? Who'd faced her demons and chosen mercy over vengeance. She reached her truck, loaded the rifles, drove down the mountain road as sunset painted the sky in colors her father would have loved. On the seat beside her, her phone buzzed. A text from Kane. Mission scrubbed. Target eliminated by another team. Rest easy, Ghost. You earned it. Callan smiled, deleted the message, kept driving. The mountains faded into twilight. The road stretched toward whatever came next, toward a life that would be hers, lived on her terms. And if the darkness ever came calling again, if her country ever truly needed someone who could walk silent and strike deadly and come home clean, she knew where the rifles were. She knew what she was capable of, and she knew with absolute certainty that the quiet ones were always the most dangerous. She was done hunting, but she would never stop being a hunter. That was the difference between running away and walking home.